This video is going to carry on from where I left off last time, when annoyingly the camera cut out on me, as it sometimes does, when I was midway through talking about discussing your comments. It is absolutely freezing today. Seriously, it is so cold. I've got the heating on and it's still cold. And I can't concentrate or focus properly when there are extremes of temperature, either too hot or too cold. So I have to have the heating on. God knows how much it's costing me though, seriously. But yeah, it's really, really cold outside. I do like a winter. I'm a winter person, by the way. So I shouldn't really be complaining. But yeah, it is cold. Very cold indeed. Today, I suppose it's just average British weather, really. I guess we forget, I guess really, it's just normal winter weather, really. I mean, I think it's just because we're so used to the weather being so mild that we forget what it is actually like to be properly cold. If my lips look a little bit red, by the way, it's just because I have this annoying habit of constantly going like that. So if my lips look a little bit red, that's why I keep on sucking them. I really shouldn't suck my lips. It's like a habit I have. I've done it since I was a kid. When I was a kid, I used to have this almost permanent little red strip beneath my lower lip because I used to constantly suck it. I don't know why I do it. It's just like a habit. I should try and stop because it makes them chapped. Anyway, which obviously looks worse when it's cold as well. Yeah, so I wanted to carry on with these comments from where I left off. Just try and find them here. I'm also terribly disorganised. All my notes are all over the place. Why do I... Yeah, where was I? No, here it is. Right, I found it. So yeah, so I was talking, one of your comments, one of you was saying how I put you on the road to getting your ADHD assessment because although you're not autistic, you were watching the videos, I think originally because, like me, you have very severe OCD around COVID and germs, and our OCD does seem to be very similar in the way it affects us. So I think that's why you were originally watching the videos, was because of that. And then when I was talking about executive functioning problems associated with my autism, you notice similarities, but obviously you're not autistic, but you notice similarities in yourself, and that put you on the road to getting an ADHD assessment and then a diagnosis of ADHD. So I just got to the bit where I was just talking about how you were talking in your comment about the similarities that you've noticed between yourself and me, but also there are differences. So you're a very much a routine-based person, but you would not say that your routines are as rigid as the way that I've described my own. So that's where I got up to last time. And then you said that you also monologue and interrupt people a lot, which is something I also do. But not in your case, it's not because you're unaware of the social cues, but it's due to impulsivity and the fact that you can struggle to stop yourself. The fact that you can tell when people are not interested is a great source of pain. So that was an interesting insight, and I would say from my end, I sort of feel that in my case there's a bit of both going on, that I do struggle to read other people's social cues unless they're really, really obvious. But there's also a sense that I find it very, very hard to stop myself, a bit just in the same way you were describing. I certainly can relate to that kind of impulsivity of not being able to stop myself, even when I do know that maybe it's a bit inappropriate, and I'm sort of like kicking myself inside, like saying, you really should not talk now, and yet sometimes I just cannot stop myself. I know this happens like in groups and things like that, where sometimes I will butt in, and I do try and stop myself. I guess you could say, some people call that autistic masking. I would say it's not autistic masking, it's just that I want to be considerate, essentially. If I were to not do that, if I were to completely not try and restrain myself, I would be being extremely inconsiderate. So And I guess now my social development is at the point where I do realise I have kind of latched on to certain social rules, and I do have some understanding now of maybe what's not appropriate in a way that I didn't have when I was younger. But nevertheless, I do find it really, really hard to stop my natural kind of tendency to interrupt people, to monologue, to steer the conversation back to my interests, to switch off and to completely lose attention and focus if the discussion is on something I'm not interested in, to have a desire to drive that conversation back to my interests. By the way, I do try my hardest to focus on what other people are saying, but because I genuinely want to be able to do that, but it's a constant effort, and I can only do it for so long, and very frequently, because that effort is so hard, it will often break down, and when it breaks down, it's often at a point of no return, where a switch has been clicked, I guess, a switch has been turned on, or off, or whatever, and I literally then completely lose track of what's going on, and it's at that point that I tend to exit from social situations. Not that I put myself in social situations that often. I'm talking about sort of like online groups and stuff at the moment. So yeah, there is this real tendency, this kind of drive in me to dominate conversations, to steer conversations back to myself. And although I do try very hard to control that tendency, because I am aware of what's appropriate and inappropriate now to some extent, and I do want to try not to be inconsiderate. Well, I guess there's a part of me that just wants to try and be peaceable, and I am aware that it could irritate people, but it is this real kind of, problem, because it's incredibly hard for me to control that part of myself, and this is why, despite the fact I have developed certain social skills I used not to have, I am still very socially challenged, because it's so hard to control that natural part of myself, and the longer I'm with someone, the harder it becomes, and eventually I can no longer control it anymore, and it completely breaks down, and I will end up dominating the conversation, and this is definitely worse when I'm anxious or stressed. I will interrupt people. I apologise for it, most of the time, but it's really hard for me not to interrupt people. So part of that is to do with not reading the social cues, but even when someone is visibly not wanting me to do it and making it very clear, where it's become incredibly transparent, even then I still struggle not to do that. So yeah, I think it is actually for me a combination of not reading the social cues, the autism, but also that element of impulsivity there, which is why I definitely think there are features of ADHD within my presentation, although I don't know if I'd meet the full criteria because I haven't been assessed, but I can definitely relate to that, definitely. I am a talker, non-stop. But that might also reflect my non-verbal learning difficulty profile, in that people with the NVLD classic presentation do tend to talk and talk and talk. It's described as logorrhea or verbal diarrhea. And like I said, I do know there's one person at one of the groups I go to who's very similar to me. In some respects, he's even worse than me in some ways in his over-talking. If he's watching this, I hope you don't mind me saying that. He's aware of the problem anyway, so I'm sure he'll just take it on the chin. He's really funny. But yeah, we're both talkers, and we both find it very hard not to over-talk. And to listen to things we're not interested in. I think we both struggle with that, although we both try to listen, but we both find it really difficult. It's like I do try, it's just really difficult, you know what I mean? It's like it uses up my full effort. So it's this constant conflict between a part of me that does want to listen to what the other person's saying and genuinely wants to try and connect, there's that part of me, and then there's the other part of me that wants to dominate, and they're both in conflict with one another. It's like I have to keep a rein on the kind of impulsive part of me. That's what it is. I do feel that there is this kind of conflict within me between the impulsive part and the more OCD, rigid part, and they're constantly trying to control one another, and that creates anxiety in and of itself. Anyway, the next comment, someone was talking when I was about the relationship between ADHD and autism, and they were saying how they call those with autism plus, who also have ADHD, they call them ASD plus plus, and that they're distinctly different from those with just pure ASD or ADHD, and they combine in a way that's synergistic to form its own distinct variant. Bearing in mind that most autistic people will share at least some features of ADHD, it's kind of, it'd be very rare for an autistic not to have at least some features of ADHD. I guess they're referring to those who have a very extreme presentation where their ADHD traits, if you want to call it that, are kind of at the point of being clinically significant, to the point of actually getting a diagnosis, or because I'm not sure if my traits are enough to actually be diagnosed with ADHD. I mean, I don't know, because I haven't been assessed, so it may well just be part of the autism for me. But I do know someone with very, very severe ADHD, and there is a distinctly different flavour there. Her ADHD, though, I mean, she's been diagnosed with ADHD, she's got both ADHD and autism, but her ADHD is particularly severe. I would say, if you're talking about spectrum, it must be one of the most severest forms of ADHD. Yeah, there is definitely a distinct difference there from her presentation of Asperger's to my presentation, even though I do feel I definitely share some features of ADHD, but obviously not to the extent she has, and she's got a diagnosis. I think the main kind of distinctions is really that, for me, like I do follow like very clear-cut routines and stuff, whereas she really wants routine, but really struggles to maintain a routine or to keep a routine, which obviously is unstereotypical for an autistic person, but that shows how if someone has ADHD plus autism, the ADHD can then make the autism look a bit different, and it creates its own kind of subtype, which is different, say, to someone with more traditional autism who has that rigid need, who has both a need for routine and also an ability to at least some extent follow routines, where she can't follow routine at all. Yeah, so that's interesting. But I also think, and I do feel that is true. I do feel there is a particular subtype of those who have a synergistic kind of relationship between autism and ADHD, where basically it becomes its own subtype. So it's not like, as a person says, it's not like they have autism with ADHD or ADHD with autism. It's a distinct subtype, a distinct variant of autism. I do think that's correct. I do think there are also other such subtypes. I think there should be more research into autism plus, which includes OCD, because there's a lot of discussion about a sort of ADHD variant of autism, where the person has really severe ADHD to the point of actually receiving a separate diagnosis, and then some, vis-a-vis autistics who might just have some features of ADHD, but not necessarily to the point of being clinically diagnosable. But I do also feel, though, that there might be other variants of autism which encompass OCD, like in my case, because I see my OCD as not separate to the autism, but having a synergistic relationship with the autism. So just like that person was talking about with ADHD, it wouldn't make sense for someone to say to me she has autism and OCD, or OCD and autism, because I sort of feel that in my case there is a distinct variant going on, in that they have a synergistic relationship, so you can't really separate the two in my brain, because they both operate together to create another distinct variant, and I can't be the only one. But there seems to be a lot of attention focused on the overlap between ADHD and autism, but not so much looking at the relationship between OCD and autism. That to me is really annoying, because it almost feels like there's a certain... I understand that people with ADHD have real struggles and that this needs to be looked at, this relationship. But they often go on about people with ADHD having particularly making their autism more severe or something. But I think the same could be said for those with OCD and autism, and yet hardly any attention is paid to that. And I don't understand why there isn't this neglect, this relative neglect of people with OCD and autism. It seems a little bit annoying, because they should be researching these equally, but there does seem to be a bit of favouritism in the ADHD direction. I'm not sure what that's all about. I think they should just be looked at equally, because they're both equally important. I think, to be fair, I actually think that if you have autism and any clinically significant other condition alongside it, whether it's ADHD or OCD, maybe operating in a synergistic relationship with the condition to get it almost becomes one condition, I do think that makes the autism more complex. Whether it's ADHD, OCD, severe non-verbal learning disability, like in my case, I definitely think that makes the autism more complex. And I've noticed this vis-a-vis autistics who just have autism, or maybe autism with like whose basic presentation is mainly just autism. They might have mental health problems as well, but their main presentation is just autism. I do think there is a slight difference there, certainly. Anyway, I'm going to move over to video number 2 now, because I want to carry on discussing your comments. So moving over to video number 2 now.